Welcome to Liberty Legion, where sensibility rises above radicalism and liberty stands above all. Join us as we bring common sense back into the conversation for freedom and for the future. Now here's your host, Aaron.
Welcome back to another episode of Liberty Legion. I am your host, Aaron Brantley. Thank you so much for being here today and listening in. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend who believes in common sense politics and liberty first. And if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps get my message out further, and without you guys, I wouldn't be here. So first and foremost, I want to thank you all as I find my groove in this podcast format. This is very new for me. I'm going unscripted today, but I really hope I can bring some value to the particular subject we'll be covering, which is propaganda, legacy media, the epidemic of misinformation that feels like is on fire across the country and has been pushed into the spotlight when we think about rhetoric and political violence since Charlie Kirk's assassination. So again, thank you while I find my groove. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Smith-Mundt Act. And it seems like some people are pointing at that as reversing the Modernization Act of 2012 will somehow solve our issues. And I truly don't think that's the case. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. So today we're not going for perfection, though. We're going for impact. So let's dive in. I know I'm not alone. Many of us are super frustrated with the state of legacy media, mainstream media, and the topic has hit the main spotlight, like I said, after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We feel like the rhetoric is out of control, raising temperatures in what already is a pressure cooker of a political climate in the United States. And it feels dangerous. I think a lot of people are worried and scared. And how do we address this issue, which feels so just... what's the right word? Just big. It's big. You can't wrap your arms around it. There's so many layers to this. There's so many different contributors. Where do we go from here? And this topic matters to me personally. So in my intro, like I mentioned, about a year ago, I started hosting TikTok lives, and the idea was political discussions. One of the first things I noticed was how much misinformation there was out there, or just how uninformed people were. Either they were just reading the headlines and feeling like they were now a subject matter expert on certain topics, or they'd see a TikTok video that actually had misinformation all over it, and they wouldn't go fact check it or dive deeper. And so when they were repeating these things, then whoever in the audience heard it would run with that. And so I was really, really passionate about trying to address the misinformation on the site, push for their sources. And if anything, if they didn't take anything from it, hopefully folks in the audience would think to themselves, next time I'm speaking on a topic, I'm going to at least make sure I have the necessary information to back up my claims, or go fact check with primary sources. And so this became apparent that it's an issue in this country. If I was encountering it at this level, and I, again, am on a small corner of TikTok having conversations with a few hundred people, how widespread is this across the country? So I think it's really important that we figure out ways as a society to address this. Now, I have to say, I think this paired with mainstream media and what we've seen is failure to include full context, imprinting very clear bias. And this happens on the right too, with let's say a Fox News. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's an interesting time. And I think more and more people have gained distrust with the mainstream media and legacy media. They don't feel like there's any integrity left in journalism, to be honest. So it's important that we try to figure out what the solutions are, maybe clear up some confusion, because I think a lot of people believe that the Smith-Mundt Act is the silver bullet. And I just don't think it is. I think it's almost become obsolete in a way, just based on the fact that we're in the information age. We have a computer at our fingertips. We can access information. So regardless if they pulled this government propaganda from being available to U.S. citizens, there's still ways to find it if people want to go seek it out, because we have the internet. Let's dive into the Smith-Mundt Act. Now, the Smith-Mundt Act was passed in 1948 in response to the Cold War, and it barred what is now the U.S. Agency for Global Media to distribute to U.S. audiences. So they obviously were seeing a lot of anti-America propaganda coming out of the Soviet Union, and they wanted to combat this internationally. They wanted to highlight United States foreign policy, basically put together state-funded propaganda to distribute internationally to help the United States image. Now, when the Smith-Mundt Act was originally passed, it barred any distribution to United States citizens. could not be distributed. Now, there were certain cases where people could get their hands on it, but not to the public at all. So very strict guidelines when passed in 1948. And it proceeded to be that way up until 2012. They continued to create material for international audiences. Voice of America was another prominent part of that, and is still a prominent part of that. But again, this was only to be distributed internationally. Then in 2012, under the Obama administration, the Modernization Act came in. And what it did is it removed the barrier, and they could now distribute this material to United States citizens. There were proponents and opponents of this. There's arguments for and against. One of the things that opponents say is that it legalized propaganda in America. I don't know if it's that clear cut. It allowed U.S. funded media, like again, the Voice of America, to be accessed domestically. So if you've heard people say, oh, the mainstream media, it's all government funded propaganda. I don't believe that's true. This is just one department that was creating content internationally that could now be accessed domestically. And what they're proposing, or what Senator Lee is proposing out of Utah, is the Charlie Kirk Act. And the main point of that is it would reverse those modernization, basically the removal of the barriers. So it would be barred from being distributed to U.S. citizens again. And there's some additional things in that act. I would encourage you to go to congress.gov. I don't know if the full text is there. If not, you can just Google Mike Lee press release on Charlie Kirk Act, and he includes a link to the full text there. It's just a few pages. It would be great for you to go read it. So I don't believe that if you address the Smith-Mundt Act, somehow overnight legacy and mainstream media is going to be this glowing beacon of integrity and unbiased journalism. It's just not. And in a way, I kind of agree with the argument that the Smith-Mundt Act is obsolete just based on the internet and the insane access to information that we have. Now, what does this mean for us overall? Do you guys think Congress should revisit this law? Do you think this will have a bigger impact or improve the current state of propaganda and rhetoric that some people think? Where do you lie on that? Let me know in the comments. I do want to open up this conversation. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. But again, I don't think one thing it fails to address is the driver of media bias, which is the ownership of these media companies, financial incentives, the bias of individual journalists, the need to attract a certain audience. There's very little transparency surrounding all of this. And we're human. Listen, I understand that. Every human's going to have their own inherent bias. However, it has gotten to a whole nother level where I think integrity comes second for most journalists, and their bias is going to shine through above that. Objectivity just seems to be lost in the wind for a lot of journalists right now, which is really unfortunate. And again, it's harbored a insane climate of mistrust amongst the American people regarding our media. Now, even if we were to take out the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012 and reverse it with the Charlie Kirk Act or whatever they choose to do, I think the government still has ways to influence the public. You can do that via press releases, briefings, controlling access to information, censorship. Some would bring up Jimmy Kimmel, and we will have a whole conversation about free speech and the FCC and dive into that a little bit further in Thursday's episode. So again, don't forget to subscribe if you want to catch that. Another thing I think we need to consider is, what factor will AI have in this? I don't know how that's going to be handled. That's a whole nother rabbit hole, but I think we are already seeing I see a video or a clip and it's so convincing, and you have to ask yourself, is this AI or is this real? And maybe that's going to help people or push people to embrace media literacy more and go fact check before they repost it or tell someone about it when it's not real, if it's done by AI. I don't know how the government plans to address AI on social media or in our media. That's yet to be seen, but I'm sure it's a topic as this podcast continues that we'll cover again. Social media companies also fuel this fire, in my opinion. They can censor certain political leanings. We saw this with COVID. It was a massive issue. We saw it with the Twitter files. Social media 100% has a role to play here. Whether they choose to boost certain accounts, if creators are being paid for certain messaging, dark money funds could be involved. Recent article on that. So social media is a big part of this. I would argue social media has become just as influential, or if not, probably more more so for sure than mainstream media. It's replacing the standard, broadcast. We'll see what happens. Now let's get into the positive part of the show, and we're going to talk about possible solutions. One solution that probably more people on the left are going to embrace, free market or true free market folks are going to kind of, make their eyes twitch a little bit, are antitrust laws and breaking up these big media conglomerates. This is a whole different free market debate, which maybe I'll have a guest on here in the next few weeks who would want to have that conversation with me and break down a free market, or maybe someone on the left who believes that antitrust is the solution. But we do know either way, just factually, these media companies have been gobbling up smaller competition for years now. And there's just way fewer players in the game, which makes competition much less of a deterrent in regards to just having these glaring bias and doing whatever they want to do. So that's one thing. And I don't know if Congress is going to look at that. We have, some big mergers pending. And again, we'll talk about this specifically in relation to the Jimmy Kimmel situation on Thursday or on the next episode. One thing that I think would help and that I would like to see possibly implemented is some transparency requirements. So we could talk about funding disclosures, make sure we have clear sourcing. This would apply too if we go back to the Smith-Mundt Act. If, any media is utilizing material that was produced by the government, there should be a disclosure that this was produced and distributed by the U.S. government. I think that would hopefully put some folks at ease that, we have just government propaganda flying all over the place, which we probably still will, even if we add all of these things. But at least there's some way to hopefully minimize it. Maybe we create an index of political bias based on, the primary funders of these media companies, the heads of the media companies, past lawsuits, if they've, had multiple defamation lawsuits from political related topics. I don't know. That's just an idea I have. Maybe it exists. If it exists, please comment or shoot me an email and I'll check it out. You can contact me on my website, thelibertylegion.com. Always love to hear from you guys. So please absolutely take advantage of that. Now, this is the one that I probably lean into the most because it absolutely relates back to personal responsibility, which I am a firm believer in. That's media literacy. So if we can teach citizens how to spot a certain political spin or a certain bias, that's going to 100% help tone down or at least lessen the impact of propaganda or bias within our media stories. Critical thinking has been kind of lost, I think, in today's day and age. I would say most Americans agree that critical thinking feels like just, I guess, less and less common. And there are some states that are requiring media literacy school curriculum. I believe it was 12 states last time I checked. I think that's fantastic in K through 12 education. I think it's important. We have so much information now flying at us. Just imagine future generations. They will have to have the ability to spot misinformation, to seek out primary sources, to know how to research and confirm or counter incorrect information or bias that they're seeing. I think there could be, or there should be, and I'm sure there is, professional training for teachers and educators. Another option for communities is maybe some classes in public libraries, some workshops around media literacy and ways to encourage critical thinking, which we so desperately need in this country, I feel. Also, another thing that I think is very, very helpful on X, and I would like to see other social media platforms implement this. I don't think it should be a government requirement, but something that I think would 100% help with the misinformation on social media, and that's like community notes. On X, I love when, they'll post a photo and it immediately gets called out where they're trying to say, like, let's say this photo is of a kid in Gaza. And then, a community note comes out and says, no, actually it's from this event, such and such year. So I think community notes could be the future. I think they're incredibly helpful. I think they bring some accountability to creators who, post misinformation. And it allows the community to chime in and correct just the wrong information that they're seeing or misleading posts. So I would love to see other companies include that. I think there should be disclosure requirements if creators are getting paid to present a particular political message. I think it's obvious to some of us who are on that side of social media, political side of social media, but not necessarily for the audience. And I think there should be disclosure. I think that's important. We'll see if, I think the social media companies could implement their own policies, and I think they have them, but somehow they're getting around it because goodness gracious, feels like it's rampant right now on the political side of social media. What do you guys think? Are these the same discussions you guys are having? Are there other solutions that you can think of? I do think, like I said, since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, we're going to see Congress make some moves. And if we want to have a voice in those solutions, we have to be informed, we have to be having these conversations, and we have to be stepping up to get involved, especially as we see just a growing influence of independent journalists and creators on social media. And, it leads to a broader conversation about free speech, which in my opinion should always reign supreme and should be the top priority is how do we preserve free speech? The media, what do we do about addressing just the insane bias in the media and our current political environment? Because it's not helping the situation. I think it's fueling this divide, and some of the rhetoric, in my opinion, is very dangerous that's been pushed out of legacy media these last 10 years now. So to wrap this up, I don't think the Smith-Mundt Act is this silver bullet that some people think it is to address our propaganda, media bias, misinformation epidemic we have in the country. But hopefully that gives you a little more context. We'll see what happens with the Charlie Kirk Act. I encourage you to please go read up on that. Again, that's from Senator Lee out of Utah. You can just Google Senator Lee, Charlie Kirk press release, and there's a link to the full text of the bill at the bottom of that press release. And what can you guys do? What can citizens do? I would say propose solutions to your lawmakers. Make sure you're contacting your lawmakers. If you think the Charlie Kirk Act is the answer, contact them and tell them why. If you're against it, contact them and tell them why. It's so important to have your voice heard. I know sometimes it feels like a mundane task, but we have 100% gotten way too complacent where we believe complaining on social media is doing enough, and it's just not. Simply not. We got to get those messages directly to our lawmakers. What could you do in your communities? One idea is pursue starting a media literacy program in your public libraries. See what it takes to host one. See if they're already being done and maybe the material's already ready and you can repurpose it and roll it out to your community, because I do think that's going to play a huge part in the ever-evolving world of independent journalists and social media especially. Have conversations with others. If you hear something, go to a primary source to fact check it. Don't just take the headline and run with it. Read the whole article, because we know even headlines are so misleading right now. They don't include the very important context or factual information until the third or fourth paragraph. So read the whole article before you're spouting off about it. I just want to save you the embarrassment of possibly being completely wrong. Yeah, I encourage, again, you guys to either contact your representatives, see what you can do within your community, maybe personally try to develop your media literacy, see if I'm sure there's sources online or resources online that you can find and build those media literacy muscles. Critically think. For the love of all that is holy, please embrace critical thinking. It would do this country so much good. Once again, I want to thank you guys for being here. I hope that you found some value in this conversation. We'll continue talking about free speech in the next episode. And once again, you're not just an audience to me, you're part of this community. You're part of the Liberty Legion. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing out the podcast, please subscribe. Continue to build this community with your help. I can't do it alone. Let's try to bring common sense back to politics. Let's fight for freedom together. And yeah, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks again so much for your time.